Chapter 2, Beating Guest Expectations Through Planning, what you guys will notice about a lot of these summaries is that they are less than 15 minutes, and that's because the program that I use doesn't allow it to go over that much, and quite frankly, I don't think you're going to listen if we go any further than that anyway. So, as we always say, this is no substitute for reading the chapters and reviewing the PowerPoint, so just kind of go over these things piece by piece. So again, expectations through planning, that makes perfect sense, right? It should make perfect sense. And there are some generic strategies, and I would say that you kind of review these. I would probably say, based on a lot of comments I read in the class, usually those of you that are working in an industry that involves service, which seems to be most industries, you have probably seen one of these strategies in some way, shape, or form implemented. Okay, and it doesn't mean that they're always successful, but it just means that there is kind of an interesting generic way of kind of grouping them together. And as such, it doesn't mean that one is better than the other. It just means figuring out which one works best for the organization, the property, the whatever the case may be. So, you look at this statement, and it's very basic, and it makes perfect sense. Okay? Lower price. Maximizing operational production efficiencies. So, it's bare bones, and that's okay. So, we're pricing ourselves as the number one choice. So then, desirable differences, real or driven by marketing, between your service or product and everyone else's. So we see this, and it's also possible that these can be combinations of these three generic strategies. As you kind of look at those, you kind of see that that's definitely a real possibility. Image and icon associated with a specific product, service, or organization. So one thing I would say pretty much early on would be our industry. A lot of this is the brand and the expectation of service of the brand and the quality of service of the brand, because a lot of these different, take a hotel for example, within a hotel's portfolio there may be a bunch of different brands, and those brands are catered to different types of consumers. And so when you see a logo for a particular hotel, a particular restaurant chain, a particular whatever the case may be, you've already started to kind of associate that with a certain level of service quality, which could be anything and everything in your mind. And it could be, well, to revert back to the first one, I know it's not going to cost a lot of money, I know exactly what I'm going to get, and I'm totally fine with that. And you understand about branding, and sometimes it's very easy, sometimes it's extremely difficult to create and maintain that brand, and it's also possible that you have your perception of what the brand should be maybe completely different than what your consumers feel that your brand is, and that's something that just is that you may have to rehash over and over again. But the reason that we are different from properties X, Y, and Z is because of this. When you see our name, you know that. And I could put up 12,000 brands on a slide and ask you guys, and when a lot of times in face-to-face situations I will do that and just say, what's your first impression? And if there's 40 people in a class, we may get 40 different answers. We may get 3 different answers. They want everyone to give the same answer because that's exactly what they're going for. The niche market, again, if you can't be everything to everybody, here's something that you can be to a certain group that will still remain profitable and, occupies 80-90% of our hotel rooms 365 days a year, or fills up a 100-seat restaurant 6 nights a week, whatever that's going to be. And finding out that niche is sometimes difficult. As I said, making sure that there's enough of that market to turn a profit. So strategic plans, you've heard it a million times before. It doesn't change any just because we're talking about hospitality. So there's a look at the planning cycle, and very similar to other planning cycles that you've seen in other courses and other topics. Doesn't really fluctuate that much, and that's not to say I'm glazing over it. It's incredibly it should look fairly familiar to you by this point. An environmental assessment, again, careful examination is the key word. So as you sit there and you look at all these factors, and then forecasting. Forecasting is very difficult to do under normal circumstances. So just trying to sit down and say, what happens if this occurs that is beyond our scope of control? What are we supposed to do, or how will that affect what we're trying to do, and how will that affect our business? And so you constantly go back and you constantly look, as you're all very well aware, you know that those factors externally could change, seems almost like daily. But certain legislation or other businesses or events that happen outside your scope, what does that mean? We used to always look at, from a restaurant perspective, somebody new that opened. I was part of a community that had the second largest restaurants per capita in the U.S. So a new place opening up for us wasn't anything out of the ordinary, but what did it mean for us when they did? So again, we go back to some key drivers that we talk about. We talked about external, and of course you have to go internal. When we talk about SWOT analysis, and you've heard that before, probably many, many times, but part of the service component is, what are we good at and what aren't we good at? We try to step out of our comfort zone from a service perspective. It may be that that's something that's just not feasible, or that doesn't work for what we're trying to do. We've seen countless examples, and I'm sure that you could think of some as well, where you go into an establishment and the establishment and your perception of the establishment doesn't match the service that's offered. Sometimes the service exceeds it, and that's great, but usually you go, this is not what I expected. And that's usually not necessarily decor. It's probably more the level of service. And you could sit there and name places over and over and over again that would come to mind, where you say, when I go to a Ritz-Carlton, I expect this. So they would sit down and look and say, okay, this is what we're trying to go for. Making the forecast of future trends, and also current trends. So, what is it about service today that we need to focus on? What is it about service next year, 5 years from now, 10 years from now, where we see where it's going? What role is technology going to play in the service component? How is all that going to break down for us? So, again, quantitative information, qualitative information, surveys, questionnaires, statistical analysis of markets, and looking at your bottom line, and so on and so forth. If we decide to implement a new service strategy that is more complex and more labor intensive, we need to be able to measure that to see, just like return on investment and cost benefit analysis, all those things play into hand. So again, in your assessment, you look at economy. That I would think would hopefully make sense. Overall environment, and just look at the things in society and demographics. The change. And so when, we start talking about this generation or this group, and how are we supposed to manage or service, with the advent of technology and the changes in how they seem to be happening so rapidly, how do we keep up with that? You look at all these different factors and you go, that can't really, is it really that much? It is. And, being able to keep up, you can all probably remember, going to a restaurant, for example, and, holding a thing that was the size of a Frisbee that vibrated. That, your table's ready, and now it is should just give us your phone and you can walk around the shopping center or go walk down the beach and we'll text you when your table's ready. That's a nice feature. It's a nice service feature. It's also a nice marketing feature for us because now we have your phone number to, press beyond that and see what else we can do to really focus in. Talk about that niche service of how now I have a direct customer relationship that I got without, flyers or questionnaires or anything like that. We actually have your information. I mentioned the changing competition and how that can affect you, and maybe it's something that they do better than you. Maybe they don't. Maybe they think they do. Maybe you think you do it better, but it will, if someone enters that market, it may have an effect. Suppliers, again, because this is a long chapter and we only have 15 minutes, I'm kind of going through there. But as you look at this information, it's important that we get to parts like this. It's a nice box that we could fit these groups in, and you know by now if you've done service that they don't all fit in here, but we always hear about these groups and how do we do this and how do we do this, okay, boomer, and what's it going to be. But understanding characteristics is important as, again, you try to develop a level of service. So what might be right for boomers may not be right for millennials. It may not be right for Generation Z. It just depends. And the more you can understand your customer base, the better you're going to be at achieving a service level that they're expecting. And again, through that analysis of the environments and getting feedback and understanding what happens if you do this and if you do that, and the changes that happen everywhere, and they seem to be happening daily. Ecology is one, and you guys will hear me talk a lot about because I really like the sustainable aspect of our industry on all aspects. And it is something that at first was a really nice, neat thing to say, but as it's developed more and more and the resources are there for consumers, it has become they're going to fact check you on this stuff, and they're going to make sure if you say you're this, that you're actually doing it from not just when you walk into the hotel, but where your products and services are delivered, how they're delivered, who delivers them, the status of the companies that you have aligned yourself with for products and services, and are they also using sustainable practices. So things like that have become amplified quite a bit. And I've said this in classes, and I'll continue to say it. It's a great thing. It's also usually not a cheap thing at first if you really want to do it all the way out. So again, if you decide to do that, and hopefully a lot of them will, and it seems like a lot of them are heading that way, it's again that perception of what the guest sees when you say we're starting to do green and we're doing this, and the next time you stay in our hotel, the reason that you don't have as many towels, or the reason that your shower only does this, or your toilet flushes this way, or we ask you to do X, Y, and Z, is something that, again, the market has exploded for that type of consumer, if you will. So this chapter is a good introduction to all that, and it starts us on the path of really trying to narrow down the type of service that we think will fit best for our establishment, and how that we can relate that to our guests, and, as we say, go back and review and see if it's actually effective.